The sound of that slap still explodes inside my head like a gunshot in a closed room. It wasn't just the strike against my daughter's cheek that froze the entire table. It was the silence that came after thick, heavy, almost criminal. We were gathered for a seemingly quiet family dinner when my son-in-law Michael, his eyes blazing with fury, rose from his chair and struck her across the face with his open hand. I saw my daughter's head, Emily's head, snap from the force of the impact, and then the unthinkable happened. That man's mother, Linda, sitting beside him, clapped. She clapped as if she were celebrating an act of justice. In that instant, I knew something irrevocable was about to begin. Emily didn't cry immediately. She stood motionless, her hand covering her burning cheek, her eyes wide open, as if her soul had been suspended in the air. I rose slowly, without shouting, without moving a chair, without slamming the table. My heart was galloping inside my chest, but my voice didn't tremble. I looked at everyone present, at those who lowered their heads, at those who pretended not to see, at the aggressor who was still breathing with rage, and at the woman who had just applauded violence as if it were a spectacle. Without saying a word, I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Michael's hand was still in the air when his mother Linda spoke with a twisted smile. That's what she gets for talking back? No one reacted. No one. Not the other guests, not even those who had known for years what went on behind closed doors. The air smelled of freshly served food and poorly concealed fear. Emily was still standing, trembling in silence. I ended the call. I calmly put the phone away and said only one sentence. Nobody leaves this house. They looked at me with contempt. They had no idea what was about to happen. But before I continue, I would like to know if you've subscribed to William's Revenge Stories and liked the video. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. Now let's continue. Michael laughed arrogantly. "What are you going to do, old man?" he sneered. I didn't answer him. I slowly approached my daughter. I placed a hand on her shoulder. I felt her body rigid, stiff like a statue broken inside. I looked her in the eyes. In her gaze, I saw years of silence, of muffled cries, of nights locked in the bathroom, crying without anyone coming. I also saw the fear of a woman who no longer knows how to ask for help, because asking so many times without an answer eventually silences the voice. Then something happened that none of them expected. The doorknob of the main door slowly began to turn. The metallic sound echoed in the dining room like a warning. Michael's mother stopped smiling. Michael took a step back. I didn't move. The door burst open and two men entered with firm steps, followed by a woman in a dark suit. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't push anyone. They just showed their badges. The word authorities dropped onto the table like a hammer. "We received a call for domestic violence in real time," one of them said in a dry tone. Michael's face transformed. He tried to deny what happened, but Emily, for the first time in years, spoke before he could. "Yes," she said with a broken voice. "He just hit me." I felt the air return to my lungs after decades. Michael's mother, Linda, stood up indignant, screaming that it was all a misunderstanding, that her son had only meant to correct her. That word, correct her, cut through me like a knife. One of the officers asked her to calm down. She moved toward my daughter and shamelessly raised her hand again. She didn't manage to touch her. The officer stopped her dead in her tracks. "Ma'am, step away right now," he ordered. The scene definitely broke. My daughter began to cry, a deep, long cry held back for too long. The woman in the suit approached her, covered her with a shawl, and spoke to her with a kindness that I hadn't been able to offer her before, not for lack of love, but out of ignorance, disbelief, out of fear of confirming what was always right in front of my eyes. I, at 68 years old, had just understood that silence can also be a form of violence. The officers pulled Michael away from the table. He shouted, insulted, swore that it was all a conspiracy. No one believed him. The slap was still drawn on Emily's face, red marked, visible. The proof couldn't be erased. His mother was now crying, but not for my daughter. She was crying for her son and for the control she had just lost. The whole house trembled with tension. One of the officers looked at me. "Did you make the call, sir?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes, and it wasn't the first time I should have," I replied. My voice came out low, tired but firm. He asked me to give a statement later. I accepted. I knew there was no turning back. As they took Michael aside to question him, Emily fell to her knees in front of me. "Forgive me, Dad," she cried. "Forgive me for not telling you anything." I bent down with difficulty and hugged her with the strength I still had left. There were no reproaches in my chest, just an old guilt for having taken so long to see clearly. Linda, seeing that she no longer had control of the situation, started screaming that I was a meddler, that I had destroyed her family. I approached her calmly. "No, ma'am," I said, looking her in the eyes. "Your family destroyed itself when you applauded a hit." She didn't respond. Her gaze drifted. That night, while the officers took statements, I knew that no meal would ever taste the same. The table was still set, the dishes still warm, but we were no longer the same people. A truth was exposed on the wood, a truth that had been hidden for too long beneath tablecloths of appearances. When they finally escorted Michael away, Emily clung to my arm like she did when she was a child. I felt the tremor of her body run through mine entirely. Outside, the patrol car lights tinted the street, red and blue, and I understood with painful clarity that that single call I made had changed the course of many lives. But I also knew something else. What was coming would be even more heartbreaking, more revealing, and more dangerous than any of them could imagine, because that call hadn't been an impulse. It had been the first move of a truth that had been waiting years to come to light. And it was just the beginning. The slam of the patrol car door as they took Michael away echoed in the house like a final sound. No one spoke for several seconds. The dining room, which minutes before had been a stage of violence and fear, was suspended in a thick silence interrupted only by Emily's broken sobs. The officers were still inside, taking notes, observing every gesture, every object, every corner, as if the house itself were now mute evidence. One of them approached me and asked me to relate in detail what had happened. I spoke plainly without drama. I said when the argument began how Michael stood up, how he raised his hand and brought it down against Emily's face. I also explained his mother's applause, that gesture that still burned inside me more than the slap itself. The officer took notes without looking up. Meanwhile, the social worker sat next to Emily. She spoke slowly with a soft voice that seemed to restore a little air to her lungs. I watched that scene with a mixture of relief and pain. Finally, someone was listening to her without interrupting her, without judging her, without minimizing her. Linda was still standing, pacing back and forth, muttering curses against me. "This won't end here," she repeated like an empty threat. No one paid attention to her. She had lost control of the stage, and that was something she had never been able to handle. When the first statements were finished, one of the officers announced that Michael was formally detained for aggravated assault in a domestic violence context. His mother screamed, lunged toward the hallway, trying to follow him, but was stopped before crossing the threshold. "You will also be called to give a statement," they informed her. Her screams turned into sobs of rage. The house began to empty little by little. Neighbors peered from the sidewalk, pretending not to look. The gossip was already outside, growing like a snowball. I knew the neighborhood wouldn't take long to construct its version of the facts, but at that moment, I cared little. My whole world was focused on the trembling of my daughter's body in my arms. When the officers finally left, we were alone in the dining room, cold dishes, half-drunk glasses. Michael's empty chair like a gap no one dared to look at directly. Emily slowly raised her head. "Dad," she whispered, "I thought no one was ever going to come." That sentence cut through me more than any scream. "They came this time," I replied, "and I won't leave you alone ever again." She looked down. Her tears fell silently onto the wine-stained tablecloth. I led her to the sofa and covered her with a blanket. She was shivering. not just from the blow, but from the internal collapse that had been unleashed. Her years of silent resistance were beginning to crumble all at once. "I'm scared," she said with a broken voice. "So scared." "Me too," I replied honestly, "but fear doesn't rule anymore." She lay down exhausted. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if her body couldn't sustain any more tension. I stayed by her side, not knowing exactly what to say. Sometimes just staying is the only way to speak. Hours later, well past midnight, Emily's phone vibrated. It was a message from her mother-in-law. I managed to read over her shoulder. Words loaded with poison threats, accusations. Emily turned off the phone with trembling hands and left it on the table as if it burned. "It was always like this," she murmured. "She always told me I would regret the day I spoke up." I felt a knot in my chest. "That's why you didn't talk," I deduced. She nodded in silence. "She told me no one would believe me," she whispered, "that it was my fault, that I provoked him, that the hits were corrections." Rage surged up my throat like a fire. "No one has the right to correct with blows," I replied. "No one." I hugged her carefully the way you hug someone who has been broken inside for a long time. Her breathing gradually calmed down. Past 1 in the morning, the doorbell rang. I thought it was the officers again, but when I opened it, I saw a man I hadn't expected. It was Michael's brother, a thin young man with his gaze lowered. "I came to get some things for my brother," he said without raising his voice. "He asked to come in." "It's not the time," I replied firmly. "Just close," he insisted. "He's going to spend the night detained." I felt a chill hearing the word detained. It was real. There was no going back. "Tomorrow," I said. "No one else enters this house tonight." The young man nodded and left without arguing. I double-locked the door. Emily looked at me. "His whole family always protected him," she said. "Even when they knew." "That's going to end too," I replied. We sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the street was slowly returning to its usual calm. Inside, time seemed suspended. At dawn, Emily hadn't slept. Neither had I. We made coffee in silence. She held the cup with both hands, as if she needed to feel something solid. "Dad," she said suddenly. "This didn't start today." I looked at her closely. "It started the first time he pushed me," she continued. "Years ago. I thought I could change. Then I thought I could endure. Then I thought I deserved what was happening to me." Every word was an open wound. "And his mother?" I asked. "She always justified it," she replied. "She said I was difficult, that I should be grateful that someone put up with me." I felt something break inside me. "You weren't alone," I told her. "I was blind." "But not anymore," she nodded sadly. "Yesterday when you called them," she said, "I knew I wouldn't be able to go back." "You will never go back," I assured her, "and if you try, I myself will bring you back." A tear ran down her cheek. "Thank you, Dad." The sun began to appear through the window, staining the kitchen with a pale light. A new morning was beginning over the wreckage of the life Emily had led for years, and I understood, as I watched her blow on the steam of the coffee, that that call had not only stopped a blow, it had opened a door that would lead to even darker truths, to secrets that had not yet surfaced, because my daughter's hell did not begin or end with her husband's hand. We were only seeing the beginning. The next morning, as the neighborhood still woke up with the normal indifference of any Monday, Emily and I were still sitting in the kitchen with cold coffee in our hands. The night before had opened a door that could no longer be closed, and we both knew it. She stared at the rim of the cup without blinking, as if her whole story was written there. I waited without rushing her. I learned too late that forcing words is also a form of violence. "Dad," she finally said. "It all started shortly after we got married." Her voice was a tight thread, barely sustained by breath. "The first time wasn't a slap," she continued. "It was a push. We were arguing about money. He pushed me against the wall. Afterward, he cried, apologized, swore it would never happen again." I clenched my teeth without interrupting her. "I believed him," she whispered. I always believed him. She told me how at first the blows were isolated, almost accidental. A swipe, a push an object thrown against the wall. Then came the humiliating words, spoken in a low voice, so they wouldn't leave witnesses. You're useless. No one else would want you. If you leave here, you'll starve. She looked at me as she spoke, searching my face for the reaction she had never sought before. Why didn't you tell me? I finally asked, with a knot in my throat. She lowered her gaze. At first because of shame, she replied, then because of fear, and finally because I no longer knew if I was still a victim or if I was really to blame. I felt short of breath. His mother was always aware, she added. I thought she would stop him. But no. She always said I drove him crazy, that I had to learn to obey, that a man is respected when he is feared. I closed my eyes for an instant. I understood then why that applause at dinner hadn't been an impulse. It was the confirmation of an entire system built upon the blow. When you had bruises, I murmured. He said I had fallen, she replied, and you always believed me. That sentence hit me harder than any slap. I remembered dozens of dinners where I saw her arrive wearing long sleeves in the middle of summer. I remembered clumsy excuses, tense smiles, canceled visits at the last minute. I had chosen to believe because the alternative was too painful. One night, she said suddenly, I thought he was going to kill me. I looked at her with horror. He had been drinking heavily. He threw me on the floor and kicked me. I dragged myself to the bathroom and locked myself in. And when did his mother start applauding him? I asked. Always, she replied. I just didn't want to see it. She always admired him for dominating me. I got up from the chair with difficulty and started pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. I thought I had raised a strong woman, I said bitterly. I am, she replied firmly. Surviving all of that is also strength, but I got tired of surviving in silence. That phrase gave me some air back. We went for a walk in the neighborhood. Emily wore dark glasses to hide the redness on her cheek from the slap the night before. People greeted us politely, not yet knowing the whole story. She walked beside me with uncertain steps, like someone who is just returning to an open world. When I saw you make the call, she said suddenly, I thought I was dreaming. I thought it wasn't real. I myself doubted what I saw for years, I confessed to her, but last night I couldn't doubt anymore. We arrived at a small downtown square. We sat on a bench. The worst part of it all, she whispered, is that even after the beatings and humiliation, I kept hoping he would change. I still loved him. That doesn't make you weak, I replied. That makes you human. She looked at me with her eyes full of tears, but without breaking down this time. Mom died believing I was happy, she said. I lied to her. You lied to yourself first, I said softly. We all do it sometimes out of fear of breaking the little we think we have. We returned home at noon. The table from the night before was still partially messy. The remains of dinner were still in the air. Emily looked at the plates with a gesture of repulsion. He hit me right here, she said, pointing to a chair. I rested my hand on the backrest. It ended here, I replied. That day a social worker visited us again. She spoke with Emily for a long time. She explained her rights, the steps to follow, the protective measures. I listened from the other side of the door. For the first time, everything sounded like the future and not just the past. In the afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was a neighbor with a bag of clean clothes. Just in case you need it, she said with an uncomfortable whisper. Emily thanked her with a weak smile. The neighborhood was beginning to find out, and with the rumor, the glances also began to change. That night, when we sat down to eat in silence, I understood that I was not only getting to know my daughter's story, I was also getting to know my own blindness. Every word she spoke reordered my memories with a raw clarity that was impossible to soften. Before going to sleep, I approached her room. You are not alone anymore, I told her from the doorway. She looked at me from the bed. I never should have been. I nodded. But now you aren't. I turned off the hallway light and returned to my room with the weight of her story walking through my bones. I understood with pain that the blows had not only marked her skin, they had slowly erased the certainty that she deserved a different life. And I swore in silence that as long as I had breath left, no one would ever try to convince her otherwise again. The day after that painful awakening, my daughter and I were called to the police station to continue with our statements. We walked slowly along the sidewalk. She wore a light scarf to cover the reddish mark that still persisted on her cheek. I walked beside her, attentive, as if every shadow could turn into a threat. It wasn't irrational fear. It was the recent memory of a violence that was too real. Upon arrival, we saw a scene that turned my stomach. Michael's mother, Linda, was at the entrance talking to two police officers. Her gestures were exaggerated, theatrical, as if she were trying to convince them with drama instead of arguments. When she saw us approach, she squinted her eyes with silent hatred. "What are you doing here?" she spat with contempt. "You are the ones who are destroying a family." I stopped right in front of her. "A family is destroyed when someone applauds a hit," I replied without raising my voice. Her face contorted with rage. "My son was just trying to keep order," she said. "That woman," she pointed to my daughter shamelessly, "has been provoking him for years, yelling at him, disrespecting him. What did you expect him to do? Let himself be stepped on." Emily lowered her gaze. I felt the urge to stand between them. "You don't have permission to speak to her like that," I warned her. "She is not a victim," the woman screamed. "She always plays the martyr, always manipulating everyone. And now she's manipulating you, you foolish old man." An officer immediately approached. "Ma'am, you need to lower your voice," he instructed her, but she continued. "Do you know who my son is? A hard-working man? A man who supported her, who gave her a roof, who endured her attacks. She should be the one detained." The officer looked at my daughter. "Do you want to file a report for threats?" he asked. She looked at me, searching my face for guidance she hadn't asked for in years. "Yes," I answered for her. "Yes, she does." The aggressor's mother opened her mouth, but the officer stopped her with a raised hand. "Come with us," he ordered. As they led her inside, she continued screaming. Screams loaded with that poison that doesn't start with physical violence, but much earlier in the mindset. A mindset that had raised, molded, and protected an aggressor for years. Inside the police station, Emily testified for more than an hour. I watched her from the adjacent room. Every word seemed to rip off a piece of her skin, but also a piece of the weight she was carrying. The social worker encouraged her to continue. When she mentioned the word humiliation for the first time, I looked down. When she said shame, I felt something inside me break. And when she talked about the fear of death, I leaned against the wall so I wouldn't fall. When she finished, one of the staff members hugged her. I hadn't seen her receive a sincere hug in a long time. Upon leaving, Linda was waiting with swollen eyes, but not from pain. It was pure hatred. "I hope you're proud," she spat as soon as she saw us. "My son will spend the night in jail because of you." "He's in jail because of his choices," I replied firmly, "not because of ours." She took a step towards me. "Miserable old man," she said through gritted teeth. "You were always an obstacle. You meddled where you weren't called." "The blow your son gave my daughter called me," I replied. "Her crying called me, her fear called me, and your applause called me too." For a second I could see how that woman's face filled with a crazed fury. It was the fury of someone who knows they are discovered, who no longer has power. A police officer interrupted her. "Ma'am, if you continue to harass the victim and her relative, we will have to escort you out." She pulled away with a jerk. "This won't end here," she murmured. "You don't know my family." "Unfortunately, now I do," I replied. We left the police station and breathed fresh air. Emily let out a long sigh. "Dad, I didn't know she hated me so much," she said. "She doesn't hate you," I replied. "She hates anyone who doesn't allow her son to maintain control." We walked a few steps in silence. "She always justified everything," my daughter continued. She said I was dramatic, that I exaggerated, that if he yelled at me, it was my fault, that if he pushed me, I had earned it. That is also violence, I said, denying what happens, covering up, minimizing. She nodded with a small gesture. Once, she whispered, when he left marks on my arms, I showed her. Do you know what she told me? What? Strong women don't make a fuss over trifles. I felt a chill run through me. You won't hear that ever again, I told her. As we headed home, Emily stopped suddenly. Dad, she said with a tremor in her voice, what if she tries to get revenge? I looked at her with tenderness and firmness. Don't be afraid, I replied. This time you're not alone, and besides... I paused. She thinks she knows everything, but she has no idea what I'm really doing. Emily frowned. What are you doing? What I should have done years ago, I replied without going into detail. Protecting you. When we got home, we found a crumpled envelope on the porch. Inside was a note written with hurried letters. If you keep talking, you're going to regret it. Emily covered her mouth with her hands. I squeezed the paper until it was completely wrinkled. Her, she asked with a shaky voice. Yes, I replied. Her style is too obvious. I put the envelope away, not out of fear, for evidence, because every piece of that disgusting lie would serve me later. We spent the afternoon in silence. Emily was sleeping from exhaustion. I checked papers, old messages records, waiting for the call I was sure would come. And I wasn't wrong. At 6 o'clock sharp, the phone rang. It was a contact I hadn't dialed in years. A firm, professional voice on the other end. Mr. Gonzalo, he said. I received your message. I've already reviewed everything. Your intuition was correct. There's something bigger behind this. I closed my eyes. Tell me what you found, the voice replied. Not just your son-in-law, his mother too. Both are involved in something more than domestic violence. My blood ran cold. I'm ready, I said. The voice took a deep breath. Then prepare yourself. What comes now is going to strip away the whole truth. I hung up. I looked at the house in silence. Emily was sleeping. Night was falling, and the worst was yet to be revealed. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dining room with a dim lamp on and a mountain of messy papers in front of me. Old receipts, printed messages, screenshots, medical records that I myself had helped pay without asking questions. Everything that for years had been just loose concerns now formed a perfect map of the hell my daughter had lived in silence. It wasn't just a story of blows. It was an entire plot of control, threats dirty, money, bought silence. I bitterly recalled how many times Michael asked me for urgent loans to cover debts that I never fully understood. I also remembered how many times Emily canceled visits at the last minute, saying she was sick. Now everything fit together, every absence, every excuse, every long sleeve in summer. I had been paying without knowing it for the stage of her own torture. At 3 a.m, the phone rang again. It was the contact who had called me hours before. The voice sounded even lower. Gonzalo, what we found is sensitive. Your son-in-law is not only violent, he's involved in illegal money movements, and his mother appears in several of those records. I felt the air leave my chest. What kind of movements are we talking about? I asked. Money laundering, extortion collections for protection services, and your daughter was being used as a front. I clenched my fists on the table. She knew she suspected, but she didn't have proof, and every time she asked, he would hit her. I hung up with my heart pounding. The domestic violence, which was already an unbearable monster, was now mixed with something even darker. My daughter had been a victim not only of one man, but of an entire machine, sustained by her own mother-in-law. At dawn, I went to the room where Emily was sleeping. I entered slowly. She was breathing deeply, exhausted. For the first time in years, she slept without fear of someone coming in to hit her. I stood watching her for a long time, and I knew then that my call the night before had not been impulsive. It had been the door to a much bigger truth than I myself imagined. We ate breakfast in silence. I watched her like someone looking at a person returning from war. She was no longer the broken woman of weeks ago. There was something different in her posture, something still fragile but alive. "Dad," she said suddenly, "last night I dreamed that I was screaming, and someone listened to me." I felt a knot in my throat. "They're listening now?" I replied. She nodded slowly. When I was about to tell her everything I had discovered, I decided to stop. It wasn't the right time yet. She needed to get stronger first. What she was about to know could break her completely or turn her to stone, and I needed her to be standing. We went for a walk. The neighborhood was already whispering. The glances were curious, loaded with questions, but no one dared to approach. Fear changes sides very quickly when the truth begins to come out. Before continuing, tell me in the comments here what you think of this story so far and what you would do in her place. Don't leave the video, because what comes next will give you goosebumps. When we returned home, we found another envelope under the door. It wasn't a threat this time, it was a court summons. Michael's mother would also be called to testify for concealment. I smiled with a strange calm. The applause she had given during the slap was about to become her own sentence. That same afternoon, the social worker informed us that Emily was placed under legal protection. A restraining order prohibited any approach by Michael or his mother. That sheet with seals and signatures was for the first time a real defense. "He can't touch you anymore," I said, handing her a copy. She held it like someone holding a life preserver. "Thank you, Dad." "This is just beginning," I replied, "but you're not walking alone anymore." Hours later, my contact called me again. "We have something else," he said. "Recordings." "What kind?" "Of him talking. Admitting things hits threats and dirty dealings." I felt a shudder. "How did you get them?" "Your daughter recorded them for months. She hid them so he wouldn't find them. She planned to use them to escape, but she never had the courage." I closed my eyes tightly. "Bring them," I said. "She's not going to escape anymore. She's going to talk." That night, when I saw those recordings, I understood the extent to which my daughter had been a prisoner inside her own home. Her voice trembling while he insulted her, the sounds of blows, his mother's laughter justifying the aggression. "You deserve it," you could hear her say. "That's how women learn." I felt nauseous. I felt like breaking everything. But I also felt something new, a dangerous clarity. Those people should not only be arrested, they had to lose all the power they had built on fear. The next morning, I accompanied Emily to the prosecutor's office. We handed over the recordings, the documents, every piece of evidence. The prosecutor listened with a frown. When he finished reviewing everything, he looked up. "This is not just domestic violence," he said. "This is a criminal network with multiple crimes." Emily squeezed my hands. "And now?" she asked. "Now," replied the prosecutor, "the story is going to change course." Upon leaving, Emily cried for the first time out of relief. Not fear, not shame. Out of relief, I hugged her clumsily with a tired back, but with a raised soul. "Dad," she whispered, "I never thought anyone would really confront them." "I didn't think it would have to be me, either," I replied. "But sometimes life waits until we are old, so that we stop being afraid." That night, while she slept peacefully, I stayed looking out the window. I knew the worst was yet to come, that when Michael and his mother realized that their castle of abuse was crumbling, they would try something desperate. But I also knew that now I had something they never had, the complete truth. And with the truth in my hands, the revenge would no longer be about blows. It would be about justice. The day of her formal statement dawned with a gray sky and a fine drizzle that didn't seem to want to get things wet. It only felt sad. Emily dressed in silence. She chose a high-collared blouse and a jacket I didn't remember seeing before. Her hands barely trembled as she buttoned up. I watched her from the doorway without saying anything. There were battles that are not won with preliminary words, but with the strength gathered along the way. The taxi took us to the prosecutor's office without exchanging a single phrase. The sound of the windshield wipers marked the rhythm of our thoughts. When we got out, she took a deep breath, as if inhaling courage from the damp air. I offered her my arm, and she accepted it. We walked together. In the waiting room, time became thick. An old clock marked the minutes with a loud, almost mocking tick-tock. There were other people waiting, each carrying their own invisible story. No one spoke. No one looked at anyone. Emily nervously fiddled with the ring on her finger. "If you don't want to go in," I started to say. "Yes, I want to," she interrupted firmly. "I have to do it." I nodded. I didn't ask any more questions. When they called her, she stood up with stiff legs. I gave her hand a gentle squeeze. I watched her walk down the hallway until she disappeared behind a dark wooden door. I was left alone with my thoughts and that old stubborn fear that still hadn't completely left. Minutes turned into hours. I imagined her voice trembling, her memories crowding each other, her body reliving scenes she had tried to erase. And then I understood something terrible. While I was aging peacefully, believing that everything was fine, my daughter had been aging with blows. When the door finally opened, a woman in a suit came out. She approached me. "Can you come in?" she said. I entered the room. Emily was sitting at a table with a glass of water in her hands. Her eyes were red, but her posture was different, firmer, more upright. "Are you okay?" I asked in a low voice. "I'm empty," she replied, but I'm no longer silent. I hugged her carefully. The prosecutor stood up. "Your testimony is key," he told me. "She has said everything with precise details." I felt a knot in my chest, and I didn't know if it was relief or pain. "She also mentioned something we didn't know," he added, "the active participation of the aggressor's mother in several intimidations." "How?" I asked. Emily looked down. "I didn't tell you before, Dad," she said, "but there were nights when she was present when he hit me. She didn't just applaud. Sometimes she asked him to do it. She said I needed to learn," she continued, "that a woman is formed through fear." Rage rose from deep within me like a wild animal. "That is already recorded in the minutes," the prosecutor said, "and there are indirect witnesses." "What happens now?" I asked. "With this, the indictment is aggravated," he replied, "and the detention order for the mother will be requested in the next few hours." Emily gripped the glass of water tightly. Her hands were no longer shaking, but her gaze was cloudy. "She always said she was untouchable," she whispered, "that no one would dare to face her." "Everyone thinks they are untouchable," I said, "until someone stops being afraid." We left the prosecutor's office after dark. The drizzle was still falling as it had at dawn. Emily walked slowly, tired as if her entire body weighed heavily, after having let go of so many years of silence all at once. Back home, she took off her shoes as soon as she entered and dropped onto the sofa. I prepared hot tea. I brought it to her without saying anything. She held the cup for a few seconds before drinking. "Dad," she said suddenly, "now I understand something. What is it that I myself had also become an accomplice? By keeping silent." "Keeping silent didn't make you an accomplice," I replied. "It made you a prisoner." She looked at me with eyes full of tears that no longer fell. "Even so," she whispered, "today I feel like I'm breathing again." That night she slept deeply for the first time since returning home. I, on the other hand, remained awake for a long time. The story was now moving with a force that could no longer be controlled. The gears of justice had begun to turn, and everything that had remained hidden for years was starting to surface. At dawn, I received a call. "Gonzalo," my contact's voice said, "the warrant is practically ready. They will go for her today." "For his mother?" I asked. "Yes, but that's not all." I had a bad feeling. "Your son-in-law is negotiating. He knows the evidence is overwhelming. He wants to reduce his sentence by turning over information." "About what?" "About a larger group, people who operate in the shadows. He's nothing more than a link." I looked toward the room where Emily was sleeping. "So this is bigger than we thought." "Much bigger." I hung up with the feeling that the house had become too small to contain what was about to break loose. Mid-morning, Emily woke up. We ate breakfast in silence. I didn't tell her about the call. I wanted to give her one more day of calm before the storm, but the calm didn't last long. At 11:30, the sound of sirens echoed in the block again. Emily jumped up. "Again?" she asked with fear. I looked out the window. 2 patrol cars stopped in front of Linda's house, barely 3 houses away. Several officers descended quickly. "They came for her," I said. Emily approached my side. We watched in silence as they led her out in handcuffs. Her face no longer held arrogance. It held desperation. When her eyes met ours, she yelled, something we couldn't hear, but we understood. Cursing us, blaming us, clinging to the last bit of hatred she had left. Emily took a step back. "I never thought I would see this," she whispered. "Me neither," I replied. But truths that are hidden for too long always come out in the loudest way. The patrol cars drove away. The whole neighborhood was awake now, looking out windows gathered in small groups. The whispering started again, but this time the fear wasn't ours. Emily slowly sat down. "Dad," she said, "what if they come for me now?" I knelt in front of her and took her face in my hands. "Now you don't run away alone," I told her, "and now you're not hiding either. That changes everything." She closed her eyes for a moment. "I spoke today," she whispered, "and I think no one can take that away from me now." I hugged her with a tenderness that ached in my bones, and I knew then that something irreversible had happened. My daughter was no longer just a victim. She had begun to become a witness, and witnesses, when they break the silence, change everyone's destiny. Linda's arrest was the blow that finished cracking the image of a respectable family that they had maintained for years. The neighborhood awoke, speaking in whispers, as if everyone feared that the truth, when spoken aloud, could become contagious. From my house window, I saw the neighbors gather in small groups, pretending to talk about anything but what everyone was looking at: the spectacular fall of those who until recently believed they were untouchable. Emily spent the morning sitting on the sofa with a blanket over her legs, staring at a fixed point on the wall. She wasn't crying, she wasn't speaking. It was the exhaustion of someone who has cried for years and now has no tears left. I moved around the house in silence, preparing food we barely tasted, checking the phone every few minutes, waiting for the next call I knew would come. And it came. "Gonzalo," the voice on the other end said. "Your son-in-law is talking." I felt a shudder. What is he saying? Enough to save himself and bury others. I sat down slowly. Who does he want to bury? His own mother first, and then those who operated with them. I hung up with a new weight in my chest. Betrayal was now running through veins that were once called family. Hours later, the news began to circulate. Linda's detention was no longer just for concealment of violence. It was for criminal association, for money movements she couldn't justify, for pressuring witnesses in other cases that were now beginning to surface. Every new piece of information was another stone falling onto a structure that was already about to collapse. Emily looked at me with eyes full of an impossible-to-explain mixture. "I never knew anything about that," she said. "I only knew they hit me. Because that was the only power they had over you," I replied, "that of making you feel worthless, while they hid much greater horrors." In the afternoon, I received a message from an unknown number. It was from an old associate of Michael's. He asked to speak with me. I hesitated for a few seconds, then I accepted. We met at a small bar far from the neighborhood. Emily insisted on accompanying me. "I don't want you to go alone," she said. I accepted. I no longer made decisions without thinking of her. The man arrived on time. His face was marked by exhaustion, and his gaze darted from side to side with obvious paranoia. He ordered coffee. He didn't touch the cup. "I didn't know things would go this far," he said without preamble. He was always violent, but the money thing, that was business. "What kind of business?" I asked. "Illegal collections, threats, services for people with problems?" "Nothing clean," he replied. His mother managed the accounts. He only executed. Emily squeezed my hands under the table. "And why are you coming to talk now?" I asked him. The man swallowed. "Because when they arrested his mother, I knew the castle was collapsing, and when he started talking to save himself, I knew I would be next." "And what do you want from me?" I said coldly. "Protection," he replied, "to testify, to hand over what I know." I looked at him for a long time. "That's no longer up to me," I replied. "It's up to justice." He handed us a USB drive. Inside, he said, were records, names, payments, audios. I put it in my jacket pocket, with a feeling of iron burning against my skin. On the way home, Emily didn't speak, neither did I. We both knew that what we carried was another time bomb. That same night, the prosecutor's office officially confirmed that Michael had been formally indicted not only for aggravated violence, but also for large-scale economic crimes. The news flooded the television. His face, the one that had inspired so much fear behind closed doors, now appeared pixelated on the screens, reduced to a name accompanied by charges. "He's not powerful anymore," Emily murmured, not quite believing it. "He never really was," I replied. "He only seemed to be because you were alone." Shortly after we received confirmation that he had turned in his mother to negotiate a possible reduction in sentence, when I heard that I felt a strange sadness, not for her, for the misery of that bond built on abuse. A mother who celebrated blows a son who sold her out without hesitation. That night, Emily had nightmares. She woke up screaming. I rushed into her room. She was drenched in sweat. "I dreamed he got out," she stammered, "that he found me again." I hugged her until her breathing returned to normal. "He can't touch you anymore," I repeated. "Even if he gets out, he no longer has power over you." She nodded, but her body still trembled. At dawn, another blow arrived. Michael's lawyer requested an urgent hearing to review agreements. The prosecutor's office rejected it. The evidence was already too much. The change of masks had left the real face exposed. "He's desperate," my contact told me, "and desperate people make mistakes." "Mistakes like what?" I asked. "Like trying to silence witnesses." A chill ran down my back. "Take care," the voice added. "Take care of your daughter." I hung up without responding. I reinforced locks. I changed phone numbers. We warned 2 trusted neighbors. Emily watched everything with a face that was no longer that of the subjected woman, but of someone who was beginning to understand that her security now depended on being alert, not on hiding. In the afternoon, one more piece of news shook the scenario. Another man had reported that Linda had threatened him years ago to withdraw an extortion complaint. That was no longer an isolated incident. It was a pattern. "I'm not the only one," Emily whispered, seeing the report. "You never were," I replied. "You were just the closest." That night we sat in the kitchen again, like in the first days after the slap. But this time there wasn't the same panic. There was a strange, tense stillness, like that of an animal that knows the hunter is wounded, but can still bite. "Dad," she said, "I'm afraid he'll try something." "Me too," I admitted. "But this time, if he tries something, it will be his last mistake." Emily looked at me with a mixture of respect and fear. I was no longer just her refuge. I had become, without realizing it, her last wall. That night, while she slept, I sat in the living room waiting. I knew that when the mask falls, the true face doesn't always resign itself. Sometimes before disappearing, it tries to drag someone with it, and I was determined to prevent it. Sirens broke the night again shortly before midnight. I was sitting in the living room with the light off when the red and blue sound filtered through the curtains, like an inevitable premonition. Emily woke up startled and came out of her room with a pale face. She didn't need to say anything. We both knew who they had come for. Outside, the firm steps of the officers echoed on the wet sidewalk. My heart pounded hard, but this time it wasn't fear. It was the certainty that their time was up. The door to Linda's house burst open under the officer's pressure. She appeared wrapped in a dark robe, disheveled with eyes injected with fury and disbelief. She screamed my name as if she could still summon me to stop the inevitable. From the window, I saw how she tried to cling to the frame, how she flailed her legs in a last act of arrogance. No one listened to her. No one comforted her. The authorities surrounded her with relentless silence, and then the handcuffs did their job. The police cruiser door closed, and the night breathed tiredly again. Emily clutched my arm tightly when she saw them put her into the police car. Her fingers trembled not with compassion, but with a confusing mixture of relief and terror. For years she had endured that gaze over her life. Now she saw it disappear into the darkness. I felt a dry jolt in my chest, a sadness that was not for her as a person, but for what she had chosen to be. No one is born celebrating blows. They learn, and sometimes they never unlearn. The sound of the engine driving away sealed a stage that allowed no return. For her, for everyone, we didn't speak for several minutes. Emily was breathing fast, as if she still expected someone to come in and look for her. I kept my hand on her back until the trembling subsided. In the silence of the house, I understood that the arrest was not an end, but a threshold. Michael, the true owner of the fear, the man who had turned every day of my daughter's life into a test of survival, was still missing, and I knew that upon hearing of his mother's detention, he would lose the last restraint he had. Wounded animals are the most dangerous when they are left without refuge. The prosecutor's call came an hour later. His voice sounded tense. He explained that Michael had asked to speak immediately with his lawyer after learning of the arrest. He was agitated, incoherent, furious. He had also requested to see my daughter, a request that was flatly rejected. When I hung up, I knew that this wasn't over. Rats, when they feel the water rising, look for someone to bite, and I was willing to stand in front so he wouldn't do it again. I knew that night would also mark a before and after in my own life. The clock advanced cruelly slowly. Past 2 in the morning, a dry knock sounded on my house door. It wasn't a doorbell. It was a desperate punch. Emily jumped up, panic lighting her face. I slowly advanced to the entrance, taking a deep breath. Another stronger punch. From the other side, I heard his voice broken with rage and alcohol. My daughter's name came out of his mouth like a threat. I called the police without hesitation. There was no more room for explanations. The following minutes were a whirlwind of sirens, shouts, footsteps, and sharp orders. The air was heavy cutting. When the officers arrived, he was still hitting the door with blind fury. He tried to flee when he saw the patrol cars, but he slipped on the wet sidewalk and fell to his knees. I will never forget that moment. The man who for years had been a giant in our nightmare, reduced to a trembling body under the emergency lights. He shouted that it was all our fault, that his mother was innocent, that my daughter was lying. No one listened to him. His words no longer had power over anyone. They handcuffed him right there in front of all the lit windows of the awake neighborhood. Fear definitely changed hands. Emily watched the scene from behind me, her arms crossed over her chest, as if hugging her own body. She wasn't crying. Her eyes were dry, hard, attentive. I felt something rearranging within her as she watched him being taken away by the force that he had used against her so many times. It wasn't joy. It wasn't vengeance. It was the end of the spell. The exact moment the executioner stops looking invincible and becomes for the first time an ordinary man. The screech of the gate closing sounded like a necessary final point. Neighbors watched the scene. When the patrol car drove away with him inside, an infinite tiredness fell on my shoulders. Emily slowly sat on the edge of the sofa as if her strength suddenly left her. I approached and sat next to her. We looked at each other in silence. Neither of us smiled. We knew that this didn't erase the lost years or the nights of fear or the invisible wounds, but we also knew that something essential had changed forever at that very instant. She was no longer a victim waiting to be saved. She was a woman who had survived, and survivors don't go back. That morning we didn't sleep. We made coffee. We turned off unnecessary lights. We checked doors and windows as if danger still lurked in the form of a shadow. Emily sat across from me at the kitchen table, her face tired but clear. She took my hand. I felt it warm, present, real. After so many years of fear, that simple gesture was a silent victory. Outside, the neighborhood slowly regained its calm. Inside, for the first time in a long time, I felt that the future was no longer a threat. I knew that the consequences, the judgments, and difficult memories still had to be faced. The dawn after Michael's detention arrived silently, as if the night had taken the last scream with it. The light entered timidly through the kitchen window and found Emily sitting in front of a cup of coffee, which was already cold. She hadn't slept. Neither had I. We had spent the morning between silences reviewing every detail over and over again, like someone who needs to convince themselves that what they lived wasn't a dream. "Dad," she said suddenly, her voice rough, "can he really not come back?" It wasn't a legal question. It was a plea born of exhaustion. "He can't come back," I replied, "and even if he could, he would no longer have entry into your life." She nodded slowly, like someone finally accepting a truth that needs to be repeated many times to be real. The news arrived early first, in messages, then in calls. The whole neighborhood talked about the double detention, the mother-in-law, the son. Finally, the names were spoken aloud. No one whispered anymore. Fear had definitively changed owners. Some neighbors dared to ring my doorbell for the first time in years. They brought coffee bread, clumsy words of support. I thanked them politely. Emily received them with a weak smile. The world was slowly starting to look at her as a person again, not as a shadow. Mid-morning, the prosecutor's office confirmed that both would remain in preventive detention without possibility of immediate release. The charges were multiplying: aggravated violence, threats, concealment, criminal association, money laundering. The list was endless. Every new crime was another brick falling on the structure they had built, with blows and fear. When I heard all that, I didn't feel joy. I felt something closer to deep exhaustion, as if the weight of the past was finally beginning to lift from my shoulders, but leaving behind the mark of its burden. Emily received a call from the prosecutor. She put it on speakerphone. He explained that her testimony had been decisive, that without her decision to speak, none of this would have been possible, that now she had to prepare for the most difficult process, to look everything that had happened in the face without trying to hide it from herself. "You already did the hardest part," he told her. "Now comes the longest part." When she hung up, Emily put her hands to her face. "I'm afraid I won't be capable," she whispered, "of breaking down when all this ends." I sat in front of her. "You don't have to be strong for everything that's coming," I told her. "You just have to stay alive. The rest you learn." That afternoon, we were summoned to expand our statements. This time, Michael was present in an adjoining room. We didn't see him, but we knew he was there. Emily walked with me down the prosecutor's hallway with a firm step. She no longer needed to hide her cheek. The mark of the slap had faded, but the memory was still there, vivid. When we entered the room, the prosecutor informed us that Michael had agreed to collaborate, providing new names, money routes, hidden accounts. In exchange, he was asking for benefits that he would hardly obtain. Even betraying his own mother, his situation was too serious. I imagined for a moment the face of that woman hearing her son sinking her to save himself. I thought that maybe, for just a second, she would have felt the same abandonment that my daughter felt for years. "He is willing to say anything," the prosecutor concluded, "but he cannot erase what he did." Emily didn't say anything. Her lips were pressed together, but her gaze was no longer one of defeat. Upon leaving there, I found a court notification in my mailbox. The house where they had lived would be preventively seized. The bank accounts frozen, the assets investigated. The fortune built on fear was beginning to evaporate in silence. Power never tolerates being illuminated. It withers as soon as it loses the shadow that protected it. That night, Emily finally dared to check some of her things that had been left in that house. A social worker accompanied her. I waited in the car. From the street, I saw them go in. The same place where she was hit so many times was now surrounded by officials. The walls were still the same, but the dominion had changed. When she returned, she was carrying a small box in her hands. Inside were photographs, an antique doll, some papers. "This is the only thing that matters to me," she said. "The rest can keep the emptiness." Days passed. The house filled with forms, calls, interviews, paperwork. Emily testified again and again, without retracting, without trembling, without hiding anything. Every word of hers was an act of reparation. I accompanied her everywhere, not as a guardian, but as a witness to her rebirth. One afternoon, while we were having mate in the yard, Emily looked at me in silence for a long time. "Dad," she finally said, "did you know anything about what they were doing with the money?" I took a deep breath. "I suspected," I admitted, "but I never imagined it was so big." "Me neither," she said. "I just knew that every time I asked, they hit me." I felt a pang in my chest. "Now no one will respond with blows," I assured her. She nodded. The news that completely shook everything arrived a week later. One of the men involved in the network, pressured by the evidence Michael had provided, decided to confess everything, not only economic crimes, but also other cases of violence protected by the same structure. What had started as a slap at a family dinner was now revealing a framework of impunity that had been operating in the dark for years. The newspapers talked about the fall of a criminal network. I read those words with a bitter disbelief. To think that all that had been so close to my daughter, and that I only saw the last link in the chain, filled me with a mixture of rage and shame. Michael appeared one last time in our lives through a letter that arrived by mail. The envelope was shaky, poorly sealed. Emily held it for several seconds before opening it. I didn't rush her. Inside were a few lines. "I didn't want things to go this far. I lost control. I made a mistake. Forgive me." Emily read in silence. Then she calmly folded the paper and left it on the table. "He doesn't understand anything," she said. "He doesn't make a mistake who stumbles. He makes a mistake who chooses to hit every day." "What are you going to do with that letter?" I asked. "Nothing," she replied. "I no longer carry his words." And she slowly tore it into 4 exact pieces, like someone closing a chapter without needing to burn it. Linda, on the other hand, screamed her innocence until the last moment. She denied everything. She accused my daughter, me, the prosecutor's office, whoever crossed her path. Her arrogance was her worst defense. The evidence fell one after another, like rain that no one could stop. Witnesses account movements, audios, every piece fitting together with cruel precision. One day, while we were walking on the sidewalk, Emily stopped in front of a shop window. She looked at her reflection. "I don't recognize myself," she said, "and I like it." I hugged her by the shoulders. "Are you seeing yourself for the first time without fear?" I replied. She smiled. Weeks later, it was confirmed that both would remain in preventive prison until the final trial. The house seized, the assets confiscated. The family name that for years imposed silence was now synonymous with scandal. The story had come full circle. The neighborhood also changed. Some people avoided looking at us still carrying old prejudices. Others approached with respect. I no longer cared about the looks. I only cared about the way Emily was beginning to inhabit spaces without shrinking. One day I saw her go out alone to buy bread. It seemed like a minimal gesture, but for her it was a victory. She returned with a bag of croissants and a new laugh on her face. The baker asked me how I was, and for the first time I could answer without lying. I stared at her with a lump in my throat. Justice advanced slowly, as always, but it advanced. Every step was a confirmation that they could no longer erase what happened, nor hide it, nor twist it. Power was slipping through their hands like wet sand. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call. It was Michael's defense attorney. He wanted to talk to me. I refused without hesitation. I had nothing to hear from that world that was already left behind. Emily didn't want to know anything either. The past, when you decide to let go of it, is not discussed. It is let fall. The day we were officially notified that they would lose all their assets, Emily cried. But it wasn't a cry of vengeance. It was a strange, silent cry. "What hurts you?" I asked. "That they needed all this to stop hitting me?" she whispered. Why weren't my tears enough? I didn't know how to answer. The guilty began to lose everything. Money, name, allies, power. But there was something that none of them would ever recover. Control over Emily's life. And that, for me, was the real fall. One night, late in the spring, we were having dinner together in the kitchen. The window was open. A warm air full of orange blossoms came in. Emily suddenly raised her head and looked at me with a new serenity. "Dad, now I understand something." "What is it?" "That I survived. I didn't just come out alive. I really survived." I felt my eyes fill with tears. "That's more than anyone can demand from life," I replied. She placed her hand on mine. "Thank you for that call." I took a deep breath. "Thank you for staying alive to receive it." That night, when I was alone in the living room, I understood with painful clarity that the guilty were falling one by one, but that my true victory was not in seeing them lose everything, but in having rescued my daughter from the hell where they had locked her, and I knew with the slow certainty that time brings that the end was near. Justice still had to dictate the sentence, but revenge, the true revenge, had already been silently consumed. The day of the sentencing dawned clear with a sky that seemed to mock the weight I carried in my chest. Emily dressed calmly. She wasn't trembling, not crying, not doubting. I saw her in front of the mirror, adjusting her coat with firm hands. That woman was not the same one who months ago hid in my house, afraid to breathe loudly. She was different, and I was too. We arrived at the courthouse before the time. The hallway was full of whispers, lawyers with bulky folders, journalists looking for faces, relatives avoiding looking at each other. Emily walked beside me without lowering her head. I walked slowly with the steps of a man who has already buried too many illusions to run, but who still knows how to hold what he loves. When we entered the room, I saw him. Michael was sitting in the dock. His face was haggard, his back tense, his hands clasped as if he were still trying to dominate something. Next to him in another row, his mother, Linda. There was no more arrogance in her gaze, only a small, useless resentment, like a flame without oxygen. Emily sat with me in the back row. She didn't look at them. She looked straight ahead at the judge, at the place where the final word would fall. The trial was long. Every witness was another hammer tearing down the old facade. Experts, neighbors, officials, doctors testified. Audios were played, recorded blows, insults, threats. My daughter's voice trembling but firm, narrating the hell without embellishment. I felt every word like a necessary stab. When it was Michael's turn, he tried to justify himself. He spoke of stress, depression, relationship problems. No one believed him. When the prosecutor showed the bank movements, the audios with his mother, the threats to other witnesses, his speech became meaningless. The lie, when exposed, becomes clumsy and ridiculous. Linda testified next. She denied everything. She contradicted herself. She shouted. She cried. She accused my daughter of provoking him. The judge interrupted her several times. She no longer had power in that room. She could no longer decide anything. When the last presentation ended, the judge asked for silence. My heart pounded like a war drum. "This court," he said, in a grave voice, "finds the accused guilty of all charges." The air was cut. He announced the sentences. Years of prison, definitive loss of assets, disqualifications. The words fell one after another like heavy stones. I looked at Emily out of the corner of my eye. She wasn't crying. She was breathing deeply, like someone finally coming to the surface after a long time underwater. When the officers approached to take the condemned away, Michael turned his head. For the first time in the whole process, he looked directly at us. His eyes searched for my daughter. She didn't move. She didn't look away. Nor did she respond. She just watched him with a calmness she had never had in front of him. That instant was more punishment than any bars. Linda started shouting his name. He didn't respond. Both were led out of the room without glory, without power, without the applause they once thought they deserved. Upon leaving the courthouse, the press rushed forward. I covered my daughter with my arm. "We are not going to talk," I said. We walked to the car without looking back. Inside, the silence was thick. Emily rested her forehead against the car window. Outside, the city continued with its indifferent rhythm. "Is it over?" she asked in a low voice. "On paper, yes," I replied. "In the soul, that will take a little longer." She nodded slowly. We returned home at sunset. The sun came in warm through the kitchen. Emily left her bag on the chair and stood in the center of the dining room, looking around as if she were seeing it for the first time. "I came here broken," she said, "and here I stand." I hugged her. I felt her body firm against mine. She no longer trembled. That night we had dinner in silence, a different silence, not of fear but of good exhaustion of the end of a battle. Outside, the crickets began to chirp. The world kept spinning. In the weeks that followed, Emily began to rebuild herself in small gestures, going out alone, going to the doctor, laughing with a friend again, buying clothes without fear of being controlled. Each of those acts was an invisible victory for those who have never lived caged. I watched her from the distance that a father takes when he understands that his daughter no longer needs to be defended but accompanied. One day she told me she wanted to move, not to run away, to really move, to start in another neighborhood in a different way. "I don't want this place to just be a refuge," she explained. "I want it to be a memory." I helped her look for an apartment. We painted walls. We packed photos. Each box was an ordered past. When she finally left, I hugged her for a long time at the door. "Dad," she said, "if you hadn't made that call—" "Don't say that," I interrupted her. "You did it. I just dialed the number." She smiled at me with a new tenderness. "Then we made the call together," she replied, and walked toward her new life. The house fell silent again, but it wasn't the silence from before. It was a silence full of meaning, of everything that was lost, of everything that was saved. Sometimes at night, I still remember that dinner. The slap, the applause, the beginning of the fall. It hurts, yes, but it no longer paralyzes me. I understood that the revenge I thought I was seeking was never punishment or prison. It was rescue. It was taking the fear away from my daughter with the truth as the only weapon. Today, when I talk to her on the phone and hear her laugh in the background, I know that justice doesn't always fix everything, but sometimes it's enough to restore dignity. I, Gonzalo, didn't win a war. I lost years. I lost illusions. I lost a family that was never real. But I saved my daughter, and that is all a father needs to keep breathing peacefully. The hell is behind us. And for the first time in a long time, Emily lives. A year has passed since that night when the truth broke the silence of our table. Today I write these lines, sitting in the same dining room, but no longer with a heavy heart. The house is still the same. The walls didn't move, but everything inside changed forever. Emily lives in her own apartment. She works. She laughs. She goes out with friends. Sometimes she comes to visit me on Sundays, and we have coffee together, talking about simple things, about the weather, about a new plant, about a movie she watched during the week. And each of those everyday conversations is a silent miracle that I didn't know how to value before. There are still nights when I wake up with the echo of that slap ringing in my memory. I still wonder at what exact moment I stopped seeing clearly what was happening right in front of my eyes, but I no longer punish myself for it. I learned that the past cannot be changed, but it can be prevented from repeating itself. Emily barely talks about them, not out of fear, but out of disinterest. When a monster stops scaring you, it simply ceases to exist in your world, and that is perhaps the harshest sentence. I'm still here at 68 years old, more tired than before, but infinitely more at peace. I understood that being a father doesn't end when children grow up. Being a father is being willing to destroy the whole hell, if necessary, just so they can breathe again. Today I look at the sky with different eyes. I don't ask for anything. I give thanks because my daughter is alive, because she is free, because she is smiling again. I am Gonzalo, and this was my story. Subscribe to the channel so you can keep listening to real stories that touch the soul and awaken consciences. Like this video if this story moved you. Leave us in the comments what you thought of the story, what you would have done in my place, and what city you are watching us from. Thank you for staying until the end. Your support keeps these stories being told.